Welcome to Wellness Rebranded, the podcast where a dietitian, a personal trainer, and a mental health therapist get together to explore health and wellness from 3 different healing perspectives. I'm Elizabeth, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor.
I'm Maria, licensed mental health therapist.
And I'm Tara, personal trainer. We believe in finding ways to nourish a healthy relationship with our mind and body, eating for well-being, not weight, finding joy in moving our bodies, and embracing and understanding our emotions. We are here to help you redesign your relationship with food, fitness, and yourself.
How great would it be if you got science-based guidance from qualified professionals instead of trying out conflicting, overhyped, and unproven trends?
If that sounds as awesome to you as it does to us, join us every week as we dig into strategies to enrich and enhance our day-to-day life and health.
And let's start rebranding your wellness journey.
Hello, lovely listeners. Before we dive into today's episode, we have an exciting announcement. As a thank you for your continued support, we created a complimentary self-care planner download. We want to share with you quick and easy ideas to practice self-care, as well as thought-provoking journal prompts to inspire reflection and self-awareness. It also includes suggestions for how you can keep track of your wellness habits in a healthy and supportive way. Simply click on the link in the show notes to grab your copy, and let's prioritize our wellness. Well, hello, listeners. Here we are in another episode of Wellness Rebranded. I'm here with Tara and Elizabeth, and we have a great guest today. Her name is Eden Davis, and she's a registered dietitian nutritionist who practices through health at every size and intuitive eating. And she works with clients who are struggling with eating disorders and disorder eating patterns. And her goal is to help them find food freedom, which is a great topic that we've been wanting to have in this episode for a while. So welcome, Eden, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a conversation near and dear to my heart, so I always love chatting about it.
So what if we start maybe telling people a little bit what eating disorders are, and maybe a little bit of the education. What are these eating disorders? What is the difference between them? Any information that you can provide to start from the basics?
Yeah, absolutely. Eating disorders has always been something that I wanted to work on in terms of medical nutrition therapy. When I went to school to become a registered dietitian, that was my main goal, was I want to understand eating disorders, I want to spread awareness, and I want to help people recover and have a healthy, long-lasting life. And throughout the years, you definitely hear things about eating disorders, common myths, common, beliefs that just don't hold a lot of truth and can do a lot more harm than good. So a few things that come to mind when it comes to eating disorders is that they can impact absolutely anyone, all ages, all genders, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, all financial status. Everyone can be impacted by eating disorders. They do not discriminate. It's not a one size fits all. Over the years, I have seen people come through at the age of 4, and I have seen people come through at the age of 70. It really is a wide range, and it can impact all individuals. So I love starting there because it really helps, broaden us to the approach of eating disorders and the fact that they really do impact all individuals. It's not a specific subgroup that can have an eating disorder, but really anyone.
I think that's such a great place to start because there's so many preconceived notions and stereotypes about people who struggle with eating disorders, and they're not true and they're not accurate, and they can impact anyone. So I would love for you to kind of educate our audience on if there's any specific myths you can bust around that, or I don't know, however you want to phrase it, but poke the holes in sort of what we think and what it actually is.
Absolutely. Oftentimes we think, oh, okay, eating disorder, you see the female in college, right? Or the female in middle school or high school. And it's, oh, they're, being bullied, or, oh, they're a perfectionist and they're doing it for attention, or they're doing it because of XYZ. And it's like, no, the successful lawyer and the medical doctor who is 50, 60 years old can also have an eating disorder, and they do. And the little kid who hasn't even really grown up and seen so much of the world can also have an eating disorder. It's a genetic predisposition, and we overlook that so often, and we think, oh, everyone's got an eating disorder, and we play it off, which is such a dangerous thing to do. Like, it's not true, and it's not something to be that relaxed about. And we do live in a society that is very diet culture focused, but that doesn't mean that we should adapt to disordered eating and eating disorders and make that the norm.
I think also, can you speak a little bit about body shape and size and some of the kind of myths around that also?
Absolutely. So I know we wanted to chat about like the different forms of eating disorders. And it's something that is so interesting. When we think of eating disorders, we commonly think of anorexia, right? That has been the eating disorder that typically comes to the mind of several individuals for eating disorders. And yes, anorexia is a very dangerous and life-threatening eating disorder. But binge eating disorder is actually twice as common as bulimia and anorexia combined. And that just goes to show that eating disorders do not come in one size. They can have many body types, many different body styles. We see people who, are in a smaller body. We see people who are in a larger body. And it just goes back to the fact that we cannot judge an individual based on their weight and determine how sick they are off that factor alone.
Yeah, in doing so, we may miss diagnoses that are really important.
Exactly. And we commonly do. It's really unfortunate when we're not working with weight inclusive providers. Weight bias commonly does come into that area, and it can be overlooked, which is very dangerous for that individual.
So Eden, if somebody's listening and want to understand a little better what anorexia is, where bulimia is, and binge eating disorder, could you give us a quick tour on the definition and how each of them could look like?
Yeah, let's go through it. So anorexia being the first, this is characterized by restriction around food intake, and it often does lead to the low body weight. So like we talked about, individuals with anorexia commonly are in smaller bodies. We can see a lot of intense fear around gaining weight, a lot of disturbed perception of body image as well as weight. And then apart from anorexia, we have bulimia. This eating disorder is characterized by regular, often secretive bouts of overeating. So with bulimia, someone might restrict throughout the day, or maybe they're eating what looks like, normalized meal pattern, but they'll go in secret and they will compensate for that restriction and kind of feel like they're a little out of control, overeating in that episode. And then immediately following the overeating is some type of purging. So this could be vomiting, this could be extreme compulsive exercise, this could be a strict diet following the eating session. But with bulimia, we see there's a huge concern on, okay, I just ate that and I absolutely have to get rid of it at any cost. So that's typically what we see when we look at bulimia. And then binge eating, the most common eating disorder, this is just as severe and life-threatening as any other eating disorder. What we see here are reoccurring episodes of eating large quantities of food and kind of having like a whirlwind sensation. An individual will go into a binge episode, they feel like they aren't very present in that moment. They eat a large quantity of food. They feel like they can't control themselves. They cannot stop at any point. And then following that binge episode comes loads of shame, guilt, distress. Why did that just happen? How did I, quote unquote, let myself get here? Why didn't I have, quote unquote, more willpower? We know these things aren't true. We can't have willpower to talk ourselves out of binge eating, but these are the common thoughts that an individual with an eating disorder may have. So kind of following that pattern. And with binge eating, as a dietitian, something I love to look at is, what did the entire day look like leading up to this binge episode? Because commonly we see people at binge eating and we're like, oh, they just, they overeat, oh, they binge. there's so much more to it. You know, there's several reasons that people will have a binge eating disorder, and there's so much that goes into it. But one area I love to focus on is the restrictive aspect of it. Very commonly with binge eating, they restrict, and then they go into a binge episode. The hypothalamus clicks over and it's like, hey, I'm not trying to pass out. I'm not trying to, be harmed. We are going to eat. And then we go into that overeating sensation. But following that can cycle back to the restriction. So sometimes we see that restrict binge cycle form within binge eating. It's a very complex eating disorder, and something that I really aim to do in my time with clients is just creating a safe space for everyone. Being able to sit down and explore, why is the binge eating occurring? How can we, utilize different coping skills? How can we regulate our meal pattern throughout the day to decrease binging? How can we better understand nutrition from a non-judgmental perspective is such a beautiful thing, and it's hard for someone who has binge eating to be able to sit down and open up about this and feel like they are in a safe space. So I really value the work that we get to do in that area.
That's such an important work too. And I learned something already. I had no idea binge eating disorder was like, if you would have asked me before this episode, which eating disorder is the least common, I would have said binge eating disorder.
Right.
I had no clue.
Eden, is there like an amount that you have to eat in order for it to be considered binge eating, or is it more like the whirlwind disassociation that comes with it that makes it a binge eating episode?
That is such a good question. So there are two different forms of binge eating. We have a subjective binge and then an objective binge. With subjective binging, an individual might eat a slice of cheesecake, and it's not necessarily a large quantity. It's a slice of cheesecake, and it's probably really delicious, right? But they eat it, and they might eat it really, really fast. They might be driving themselves to eat it suddenly because they feel a lot of guilt and shame and pressure around this, and they're trying to kind of disconnect from those feelings. So I would label that more of a subjective binge, which I still explore with clients because it is extremely important for them to be able to slow down and work on our digestive system through that too. Even if it isn't a large quantity of food, it's still, falling in the binge category, where an objective binge would be really focusing on that quantity. Having an amount that when you eat, you have your ghrelin, so your hunger, your fullness hormone kicks in, and it's like, hey, we're full, you can stop now. But we're not able to stop. You are hearing your body say, hey, you're full, you need to stop. But usually the person will continue past the point of fullness and feel a lot of discomfort. There's not necessarily like an amount, but it's just the amount for the individual where they're like, yep, I am in physical pain and I cannot stop.
Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Do you feel like the way we treat food in society like lends itself to binge eating becoming like more common? For example, like Thanksgiving, right? It's all about the food. The whole day is about like the food. And I'm not suggesting that we're all like binge eating on Thanksgiving, but we celebrate a lot of things like that, right? Does this lead into it?
I think it can be triggering for people who do have eating disorders and disordered eating. I know I hold some support groups, around the holidays because it is a lot. But I don't think it necessarily leads into binge eating, but I think for someone who is already in that situation, it can be really triggering, and a few things we try to focus on is food is fuel. Yes, we need food for energy, but food is also holidays, and it's enjoyment, it's celebrations, it's birthdays, it's being with loved ones, and we can enjoy that. But what we really want to do is we want to focus on being present in the moment, engaging our senses, really enjoying that food and experiencing it, not feeling like I need to, eat as fast as I possibly can. I need to gorge myself. This is going to be like my last feast, so I have to go all out with it. But finding the balance, eating what you enjoy, but stopping when you are full so we can respect the body in that way.
Eden, one area that I feel like there's more and more awareness building around is atypical anorexia. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I am so glad that we are doing more research into that. And like we said, usually when you think of eating disorders, we think, oh, okay, everyone, has to live in a small body to have an eating disorder. And that is not true. Eating disorders can come in all shapes, all sizes. Atypical anorexia, we do commonly see that where someone is still experiencing restriction, but we are not seeing that they necessarily have a lower body weight or they don't necessarily live in a smaller body. And it's just one more reason we have got to stop, having that weight discrimination.
Yeah, imagine the harm that happens if, a person that matches that profile goes to the doctor and they're immediately told, hey, your BMI is XYZ and having a weight loss discussion. So
Absolutely.
harmful.
Yeah. And just being transparent, I had my own journey with an eating disorder when I was younger, and I didn't have anorexia, but I did have an eating disorder where I wasn't in a smaller body. And my mom took forever to get me to go see someone. And I was finally like, okay, I've never talked to anyone outside of my mother about my eating disorder. So I was terrified, but a part of me was also like, wow, this is gonna be really great getting to like get recovered and get treatment that I deserve. And I'll never forget, I walked into that first appointment, and unfortunately at the time we had no idea that you're supposed to see a therapist who specializes in eating disorders. Like there is actually a specialization of eating disorders. We thought anyone would be a good fit for it. We just didn't know any better. And that provider, I will never forget that moment when they looked me up and down in my body and they said, you clearly don't have an eating disorder. I can tell by looking at you that you eat food. So why don't you tell me what you're really here for? And I was just crushed. I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
my
I'm
mom.
so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah, I can laugh at it now, right? But at the time, my mom was furious. She was like, "You have no idea how long that took to get her here, And then for you to say something like that was just so out of line. Obviously we did not return to that provider, but you're exactly right. If you do have an eating disorder or severe disordered eating, and you go to the doctor or you go to a medical setting and they say something like that or promote weight loss or praise you for weight loss, not knowing that you have an eating disorder, it's like, guys, we have got to leave weight out of the conversation because we truly don't know what is going on with that individual.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point to make. And I'm so sorry that you had that experience, but thank you for sharing because I think it opens a lot of eyes. And it leads me naturally into the question. So it's one thing if you yourself are hearing this conversation and thinking perhaps you have an eating disorder, and we can chat about what you would recommend in that case. But what about for the parents listening who maybe are concerned that their child may have an eating disorder? And how do you suggest they approach it talking to the child and seeking out care?
Yeah.
That's a great question, Lisa. That was going to be my next one because I am the mother of a teenager, and I learned recently when she started coming home with the lunch not touched that they, in her school at least, they don't eat in front of each other because it's not cool. Like you could be eating a snack, but you can be eating like a pasta dish or something because you don't want to be seen eating, right? So then she waits until she comes home to eat her food. So for parents out there, when do we know this is time to get help, or it's just, a phase maybe of this thing, whatever it's happening in this school between the girls? Yeah, how do we know?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, kind of goes into what is disordered eating versus eating disorders. And so commonly, it's so hard to tell the difference. With disordered eating, it can be, a phase, it can be extreme dieting, it can be participating in these harmful behaviors. And the big difference there, are we seeing that this is interfering with our daily lives? If so, that could be an eating disorder. Or are we seeing like, hey, this is coming up, it's definitely forming a pattern. No matter what, no matter if it's disorder eating or eating disorders, we need to get ahead of it. We need to get treatment and support. But kind of seeing that difference there between, okay, are we looking at disordered eating or are we looking at an eating disorder? And what I would encourage the family to do is go ahead and set up a consultation call. I have people reach out all the time and they'll say it in an email or they'll say it in our call, and they just say, you know, I don't know. I don't know if I have disordered eating. I don't know if I'm quote unquote sick enough to see you. I don't know if this is an eating disorder. I'm like, you know what? I appreciate that vulnerability and that transparency and telling me that. And to be honest, let's not wait for it to turn into an eating disorder, right? Not all disordered eating will turn into a full-blown eating disorder, but it very likely can. So if we're experiencing that disordered eating, let's get support, let's get treatment, let's get, a team on board to help support you and prevent it from becoming extreme. And it's challenging. It's challenging as a mom to see your child go through something like that. And there are some really great resources on my website under the resource tab. There's different books and podcasts, support groups that are geared towards family and loved ones looking to support that individual.
And I think one piece of information, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that I also think it's important to see the difference. And you mentioned it before. One is also the stress behind this. People usually with an eating disorder live in distress. There's that preoccupation with food or preoccupation with your appearance or that intense fear of gaining weight or, the distorted perception of your image, but especially the dysfunction, like you were mentioning, how this is affecting your day-to-day life and the thoughts and the feelings behind this behavior, on top of also being a pattern, right? I don't think we can even diagnose a disorder if there's not a pattern. And I think they're talking about at least once a week for at least 3 months kind of criteria, but a pattern and the suffering behind it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is the impact that it is having on you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's challenging for families to go through that. There's also a few more eating disorders we didn't get into yet. I want to mention real quickly in case anyone is listening who might fall into these categories. So one of them, it's more of a recent eating disorder, and I really enjoy working with this population. It's called avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, and it's called ARFID. So this is a very interesting eating disorder that is often characterized by people who call themselves quote unquote picky eaters. So they might be avoiding certain foods, certain types of foods, food groups, because they experience a lot of distress around this type of food. It could be texture related, sensory related, but they are not getting the variety that they need and they're just not eating enough. So commonly what I'll experience is a grown adult or someone who is younger will reach out to me and they'll say, hey, I'm just a really picky eater and I need help eating more foods. And I'm like, okay, picky eater, like looking at that. And we'll get on and they either, just recently got diagnosed with ARFID or they have no idea what it is. And I think this is such a wonderful opportunity to validate this individual who more than likely grew up their entire life being told, like, just eat it. It's just food. You're just a picky eater. But they had a literal eating disorder that they weren't getting, treatment and support around. So ARFID is also a really interesting eating disorder there. It's not necessarily characterized by body image. So they don't always struggle with body image. They could have a subtype of that though. So it's not to say always, but often we do not see preoccupation with weight associated with ARFID. It really is the avoidance of the food. And then we have orthorexia, which I think is masked pretty commonly in today's society. We live in a very diet culture focused world. And orthorexia is the condition where someone obsesses with healthy eating. It's not like, oh, okay, I've noticed that I haven't gone to the bathroom in a few days, so I'm going to increase my fiber here to help out with that. And it's not, oh, okay, well, I have this medical condition, so I'm going to make sure I do X, Y, Z to support it. That is bad food. I cannot have that. This is good food. I can only eat this. attaching moral value to it. You know, you're a good person if you eat XYZ, and you're a terrible person if you don't do this or that. Compulsive exercise, not exercise, and the fact of like, oh, this is mindful movement, this feels so good to my body, but putting ourselves through extreme distress in the name of quote unquote, you know, healthy living. So orthorexia can be very sneaky.
I think also it's sneaky, but also unfortunately, sometimes it's praised,
It
right?
is so
People get praised for that as, oh, and it can become their identity. I'm the healthy one and I'm sort of doing, you know, XYZ, but actually there's an underlying eating disorder that's being completely missed.
Yeah, years ago I joined a gym that I did not work at, and it seemed like the entire clientele there, all of them were like such a tight-knit community that like the workouts were absolutely grueling, and you know, the gym ran challenges to do like the paleo diet and who could be the cleanest in their eating. And
Yep.
like looking back at that now, it's like horrifying to me, but it seems like we were basically being taught to have orthorexia at
Yeah.
that place.
It's so sad. And it's so sad too for that individual who has orthorexia, who's going through recovery, because, you know, we're working together and we're like, hey, this doesn't tie to your value. Hey, this isn't your worth. Hey, you can have XYZ and it does not make you a bad person. You know, let's understand the nutrient profile around it and, you know, apply it through intuitive eating, but we don't have to exclude it from our lives. And they're working so hard to believe in that and implement it. And then people are like, oh, I wish I looked like you, or I wish I had your willpower. You are the pillar of health. And they're like, please stop saying these things. Like, it is so triggering for them. So, you know,
And
it's kind
also
of
on the other end of the spectrum, right? Like sometimes someone is recovering from that, inviting back in foods that they didn't eat, and then people who have known them one way are, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're eating that. You're having that, and you know, not helpful either, which just drives home the point of just don't comment on what people are eating, right?
Right.
just don't comment on it is the best thing to do.
Because you don't know what you're commenting on.
Exactly. You have no idea what's going on underneath. You have no idea what their current thoughts are, what their struggles are.
It's also none of your business what other people are eating. Let people handle their own plate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Eden, thank you so much for being with us. It was so great for me to meet you because I've not met you before, but also I think it's just such an important conversation to have. But I would just love to end the episode on a note of hope. And what would you say to anyone out there who maybe is struggling with an eating disorder or is worried about someone that is, and kind of, if you could speak from your heart, what would you want to tell them?
Yeah, I would just really want them to know that recovery is possible. I know what it can feel like when the voices are very loud in your head. I know what it can feel like when you are hopeless and you think there's no way I can recover from this. You know, so and so may have, and maybe it was possible for them, but it's not possible for me. It is possible. We can all recover from eating disorders, seeking support, seeking treatment, and just really working in that area. And also reminding yourself it's progress over perfection. You don't need to wait until you feel like you're in a certain area to necessarily start treatment. Your treatment team is going to work with you, and they're not looking for you to be the perfect, you know, recovery client. They're looking for progress. So realizing that we can recover and everyone is on their own journey, and that's okay. Your recovery doesn't have to look like anyone else's, but your support system is here and, you know, they're waiting for you.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a beautiful way to end it. And also, they're not alone, right? You're not alone if you are struggling. There's no shame in it. You're there and people are here.
Eden, thank you so much. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Eden and her practice, you can find her on her website, perowellnesspractice.com. It's going to be on the show notes too, but on Instagram, same Pero Wellness Practice. Thank you so much for all you do, because as a therapist, I also know that sometimes not only how important it is for the specific help that you're providing, but sometimes it can be a struggle to find a good practitioner. So I'm happy to share your work with our listeners. Thank you again. And for all of you listening, we connect with you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you want to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find me on Instagram at coaching_therapist.
I'm Elizabeth. You can find me at Elizabeth Harris Nutrition or in my Facebook group, Health and Healing with Intuitive Eating.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Tara De Leon Fitness. Guys, if you loved this episode or any of our other episodes, we would love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really, really helps us get the non-diet word out to the rest of the world. So please leave us a review.
Yes, thank you.